this is a part where it overlaps a bit more with my clinical practice, which is what are those effects of migration, right? And there's a lot. This is often the stuff that is felt implicitly, but maybe has not had, we haven't had explicit conversation with family members about. For example, we know that a common experience is for people to have psychosomatic symptoms, right? From years of stress, years of caring and functioning with high cortisol levels. And so at this point, maybe it's a few years, it's a few decades since the migration experience, but there's a toll on our physical bodies, on our parents. And oftentimes, for the sake of surviving, right, a disconnect from how our bodies feel. What has happened to families? Oftentimes, there's a downward mobility. That's a term that we use. For example, my grandfather was a physician in Taiwan, but then he could not practice that when he came to the States. Issues with passing board exams, the use of English language, right? Many families had to find other means to make life work in the US. And that shifted their sense of self, right? That self identity piece, which is that last thing listed here. Another thing is values, right? What values came in the 70s when my parents migrated? Did those values get embedded in family life, held onto more tightly? And then did that shape the relationships being built here, right? In the 70s and 80s, we did not have systems like Line or WeChat or iPhones to connect families transcontinentally, right? We couldn't have phone calls easily. I still remember calling family with a phone card, right? You have to input all these numbers and they cost all this money. So relationships were affected and there were ruptures and there were internalized shame and guilt, all these sorts of things, right? The spiritual effects of migration, there's so many things, but what I wanna highlight is what my mom's family, I would identify as like 5th generation Taiwanese Presbyterian, and my mom's family came with those Presbyterian roots. And then when we become part of a Taiwanese church in the US, what I didn't learn until years later is that even our Asian American churches are really affected by white evangelicalism. And so, even in our understanding of our Christian faith, it comes with implicit racialization that we may not be aware of. And so, there's a different connection and understanding of God that shows up. This is something I have not actually asked my mom or talked to her about yet, but I can see the effects of white evangelicalism on the shaping of Asian American faith. Right? And on ourselves, right? In my family, this would be on my parents' sense of self and how that gets translated to me. So one example is my mom really did want to go to medical school, and because her academic trajectory was sort of intervened, and she could not pursue that, she had to learn Spanish in Argentina and then learn English when she came to the States, and so it was hard to pursue medicine with all of that change. And so she wanted that for me, right? This is not a very unique story, but in that, her sense of self, I imagine my mom as a young person, the loss and the grief around that, and then the desire put onto me, right? And so thinking about your own family story, what are these reflection questions that might be helpful for you to consider, right? What precipitated your family's migration? What were those reasons? What was the context in your family's country of origin? What was their experience like? What was life like? What was felt? What was hoped for? What was encountered? What were the losses? What were the victories? What was the actual journey of migration like? Right? I actually have not asked my mom this. Like, does she remember packing? Did she have to make decisions about what she could keep or what she had to let go of? What were the stories that were told about migration? What were the stories that have remained untold after all this time? How might it have affected our elders? And so I hope that you will, you could take notes of this, you could screenshot it. I know these all going to be recorded. You can refer to it later, but take some time to reflect on these questions and consider your own family's beautiful and resilient story of migration that shapes who you are today and the family that you're creating today, too.